I am a PhD, not an MD. I work on things that don't yet exist. So first of all, I'm going to start, since it seems to be the trend in this meeting, I'm going to start a little bit interactive. Everyone here, think about how long you expect you can live healthily with before you start to go downhill with the chronic progressive conditions of late life. How long do you think you can live healthily? Based on what you can do today, what's available to you today, what you know today. Don't answer the question, just think about the answer. Now, I want you to raise your hand if you would like to stay healthy for longer than that. I can see a few people who didn't raise their hands, and I am very confused as to why you paid money to come to this conference. Not everybody who didn't raise their hand is an invited speaker, so I know you did pay money. Maybe you just want to understand why so many of us are so fucked up as to want to live longer. But anyway, here we are. Now, I want to point out that I asked that question because I don't work on longevity. I get a lot of journalists describing me as the prophet of immortality or stuff like that. But the fact is, I work on health. I work on health. Longevity is a side effect of health. The longer you stay healthy, the longer you're going to stay alive. We all know that. We know that there's some degree of variation there, that modern medicine of today has somewhat, by some measures anyway, expanded morbidity, which basically means that it has extended lifespan more than it has extended health span, but only a little bit more. And by some other measures, it's actually compressed. So, that's a rounding error. If you want to live a lot longer in a healthy state, you will live a lot longer in total. And furthermore, if you don't live, thank you, a lot longer in a healthy state, you will not live a lot longer in total, however much you might want to. So I work on health. That's the first thing I want to emphasize. But the second thing I want to emphasize is that when we talk about living healthy for a long time, we are at risk of distracting our audience from the side effect that I just mentioned. Because humanity has lived for millennia with the fact that we couldn't do anything about aging, that however many tigers you didn't get eaten by, however many infections you didn't get, you were still going to die at a relatively predictable age because you were going to start exhibiting the chronic progressive conditions of late life at a relatively predictable age, and there was nothing you could do about it. So all we had was psychological tools, ways to put this out of our minds and get on with our miserably short lives and make the best of it, rather than being preoccupied by this appalling thing that we knew was going to happen to us for most of us, relatively distant future. We have to do this, right? So, that made sense back then, but it doesn't make sense anymore. The fact is that today we have a plan. We have an actual strategy for bringing aging under comprehensive medical control in the foreseeable future. And that means that absolutely it's great that there are plenty of motivational speakers and health specialists here who are helping you to optimize your health span and lifespan with what you can do today. But it is not very good that people like Mark can sell 500 million books and I can't. I mean, thank you. Oh, well, that would be great. Yeah, well, let's talk later. But the fact is, we need to empower humanity, to energize humanity, to take the future more seriously, to understand that it makes no sense to focus on what we can already do with the technology that already exists. I am perfectly capable of spelling Czechoslovakia, but it doesn't seem to be enough, right? Um, so we need to mobilize humanity. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. I'm going to say why I'm doing what I'm doing, how I'm doing what I'm doing, what I'm doing, and what's coming next. So, yeah, well, that's the title I gave to my talk. Oh, I should also emphasize LEV Foundation stands for Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation. Yeah, I actually, you heard the term earlier. I coined the term 20 odd years ago. That's basically the term that I coined to denote the point at which we really bring aging under sufficiently comprehensive medical control that it gets easier after that to stay one step ahead of the problem. All right, so one thing that nobody has done today until now is nobody, I'm pretty sure nobody has given a definition of aging. I mean, what the fuck? It is completely insane that we don't have a definition of aging. We don't. I mean, if you ask 10 experts, forget 10 normal people, 10 experts, what their definition of aging is, you will get 10 radically contrasting answers. I mean, they won't precisely be contradictory to each other, but they will have huge differences of emphasis. And that's a huge problem, because it impedes discourse. It means that people can't talk to each other properly. So we need a common agreed definition of aging. And if we're going to have one, then let's start with one that not only is correct, but also demystifies aging, helps people to think about aging in a useful, productive way. And that's what this definition is. This definition helps you to understand that to think about aging the way that you think about everything else in life. We go through our lives, solving problems all the time. We have this thing that's broken. We fix it or we replace it or whatever. That's something that we're all familiar with. We need to think about aging that way as well, because we need to think about the body as a machine. It's a machine that we want to maintain. If you have a car, then you will put a certain amount of effort into making sure that the doors don't fall off when it's 1 year old. But you'll be fine if the doors fall off when it's 10 years old, because you'll go and buy another one. We don't have that option for the human body yet. But that is, that defines our priorities. We're fairly fond of our bodies. We would like them to maintain their function, both mental and physical, for a lot longer than they do. And we don't know how. But at least we need a framework within which to be able to think about how, to think about what we should be doing, what technologies we should be developing so that we could. And that's what this definition of aging helps us to do. It's a starting point. So what am I saying here? What I'm saying here is aging is the combination of two processes. There's a process that goes on throughout life, I mean really throughout life, starting before we're born, whereby our metabolism generates damage, and then there's a process that kicks out late in life, in middle age or beyond, whereby damage creates pathologies. So I'm going to define those three words a little bit carefully first. Metabolism, what's that? It's simply the word that biologists use to denote the entire network of processes that keeps us alive from one day to the next. It's the functioning of the human body. Damage is a collection of changes that occur in the human body as a result of metabolism. Changes to the body's structure and composition. So increase in this or that, decrease in this or that. Okay, now the reason I use the word damage to describe those changes is simply because of the right-hand process. The body is built to tolerate a certain amount of these changes, but only a certain amount. And that means that eventually that amount is exceeded and we start to go downhill. The function of the body starts to decline and eventually to cease entirely. So those are the two processes. That's all that you need to know about aging in order to understand how to think about what we might do about aging. So, okay, what's next? Well, first thing I want to say is why it's so important to have that definition in your head, really in your head. Here's why. If you don't, you're going to make a bad mistake in even thinking about sickness. If you ask almost anybody the question, in what ways can people be sick? Then they will give an answer that looks pretty much like this table. They will say, well, there's infections. That's column 1, right? Then there's inherited diseases that a small proportion of us get from our parents. That's column 2. Then there's the big one, the chronic progressive diseases of late life. Alzheimer's, almost all cancers, heart disease, all the things that you all know about and don't want. And then almost everybody would say that way out in the stratosphere, there's this 4th category that's called aging itself, that consists of these rather poorly defined things like frailty. And I mean, the idea is like they're so different from diseases in everyone's mind that
you gotta wire up again, sir.
Oh, thanks so much, man. Let me just do that. Yeah, I was waving my arms like an Italian. So they're so different from diseases in everyone's mind that that people think they're off limits to medicine. That they're woven into the fabric of the universe, and they are just like, we have to forget that, and we can do all we like to extend health span, but only within some immutable natural limit. It's complete bollocks. That's a British word for bullshit. And that's why I've drawn this huge, big black line between column 2 and column 3. What that says is 2 things. First of all, it says that column 3 is completely different from column 1. And I'll come back to that in a moment, because that's a huge mistake that we've all been making. Well, always seems to be defined. Column 3 is completely different from column 1. But the big thing I want to emphasize here is column 3 is not different at all from column 4. There's no meaningful, the only difference is semantic. The things in column 3 are the aspects of aging that we have chosen to give disease-like names to. And that is all. And that's rather important, because nobody's going to try to pretend that the things in column 3 are off limits to medicine. We spend rather a lot of money on the basis that they are very much curable. And therefore, if we understand that there's no real difference between column 3 and column 4, we can no longer support the supposition that column 4 is off limits to medicine. So here's why that's important. Coming back to my definition of aging, if you make that mistake, if you think column 3, the chronic progressive diseases of late life, are somehow similar to infections and dissimilar from aging itself, you're going to do geriatrics. You're going to do what I'm describing here as essentially trying to separate damage from pathology. Now, of course, that's a sensible thing to do in principle, because the goal here, if we describe it in these terms, is to separate metabolism from pathology. We want people to carry on being alive, in other words, performing metabolism, without, at the same time, getting sick, eventually, right? So we could separate metabolism from pathology by separating damage from pathology. But it's obviously not going to work once you understand the ways in which people can be sick. If damage is continuing to accumulate, then you're asking geriatric medicine to be infinitely good at stopping damage from causing pathology, which is obviously not going to happen. Anything that directly attacks the consequences of something that's accumulating is going to become progressively less effective as time goes on. It's just, a child could understand that. And yet that's where we spend billions and billions of dollars. It's obviously quixotic. Now, I'm not the first person to notice this. More than 1 century ago, a few people started to realize that this was a mug's game and that we had to do something else if we wanted to separate metabolism from pathology. And they said, well, okay, let's try and separate metabolism from damage. The inspiration, of course, was the living world. We see a huge variation in the living world with regard to how rapidly an organism's metabolism generates damage, how rapidly they age. And so the idea was, well, if we study this really, really hard, maybe we'll understand it well enough that we can actually, use that understanding to develop therapies that will make the body run more cleanly. That's a fine way of saying it. Unfortunately, that too has been totally unsuccessful for a century. Why? Different reason, but just as profound. The reason is that the creation of damage is just too intrinsic. It is too inextricably intertwined with the things that we need metabolism to do to keep us alive. It's just not going to happen. It's not a matter of not, I mean, metabolism is ridiculously complicated. We have a very poor understanding of it even now. We could change that, with AI and everything, but it wouldn't help because you just can't separate the creation of damage from the performing of things we need things to do. So everyone had given up. By the 60s, 1970s, gerontology had become a bit like seismology. I mean, in fact, very like seismology. Seismologists, they understand that the thing they study is bad for you, but they have no aspiration at all to stopping the thing from happening, right? They will just, try and get out of the way. That's it, right? It was exactly like that. You could not discuss doing anything about aging in a grant application and have any chance of getting funded. That I am not exaggerating. Now, this did change in the 90s and 2000s a bit. And it's changed a lot now. And I feel I can take some of the credit for that. But the reason it changed was not because we made any progress on separating metabolism from damage. We did not. The reason it's changed is because of the third approach, which I pioneered maybe starting 25 years ago, which is to leave both of those two processes alone, but instead to separate the processes from each other by periodically repairing some of the damage. The idea here is very simple. You let metabolism create damage at the natural rate, but if you can periodically eliminate some of that damage from the body, then the damage will not reach the level that causes us to get sick. And, hello, we already do it with simple man-made machines. This car was 800 years old and it's working every bit as well as it was the day it was built. It's not doing that because it was built to last 100 years. Come on, it was built to last 10 years. But unlike you lot, the owners of this car have chosen to fall in love with their cars sufficiently to do an unusually comprehensive job of preventative maintenance on it so that the rust never accumulates to the point where the doors fall off. Now, you may think this is a simplistic analogy, but it isn't. It's a completely valid analogy. Yes, the human body is enormously more complicated. But against that, we have to remember that the human body is on our side. It's a machine that has a lot of self-repair built into it. And so even if we can augment that self-repair just a little bit with rather primitive augmentations of the kind that we ignorant humans are capable of coming up with, then we can make a big difference. And if you don't believe that, let me take you back 150, 200 years. Earlier today, we heard about Semmelweis. And of course, we also remember that a decade after Semmelweis, somebody came along who succeeded in convincing the medical establishment of the thing that Semmelweis failed to convince the medical establishment of, namely that hygiene is quite a good idea. His name was Louis Pasteur. Around the same time, there was a guy named Edward Jenner. If you think back, these people saved millions and millions of lives. And they did so with the most elementary imaginable understanding of the immune system. They hardly understood anything. They understood a teeny tiny fraction of what we understand today about the immune system. And even today, we know how much we don't know. We understand the immune system very poorly. So a tiny amount of help can cause an enormous amount of benefit to what the human body can do and how long it can keep us healthy. Now, of course, we do have to take this down to practicalities at some point. And so I did. 25 years ago, I proposed this classification. So what is this? There are, as I said, as I've been emphasizing, the human body is a really, really complicated machine. And so it accumulates many, many, many different types of damage. But it turns out that those types of damage can be classified into a relatively manageable number of categories. I put forward this classification into just 7 categories. And the purpose of this classification was the right-hand side of this table, the corresponding ways to implement a maintenance approach to eliminate the damage. So just for illustration, let me talk about the first one, cell loss. We've heard a little bit about that today already. Cell loss just means cells dying and not being automatically replaced by the division and differentiation of other cells. Parkinson's disease is a fine example of that, where a particular type of brain cell called a dopaminergic neuron dies at a more rapid rate than your typical neuron, and they don't get replaced. You get Parkinson's disease if you lose too many of them. Turns out that we can fix that. How do you fix it? It's obvious. Stem cell therapy. You prepare cells in the laboratory that are in the right state so that you can inject them into the correct part of the brain. They divide, they differentiate, they replace the cells that the body is not replacing on its own. This was first tried more than 30 years ago and occasionally worked. Mostly it didn't, but that was basically, and everyone understood this at the time, it was basically because there was no ability to manipulate stem cells appropriately in the laboratory so that you were injecting the correct type of stem cell. Now we don't have that problem. We're really good at manipulating stem cells. And so literally there are 5 clinical trials going on right now for Parkinson's disease stem cell therapy, and everyone's very optimistic. I won't go through the rest in the interest of time. All I will say is that most of these things on the right-hand side were at a very much less far advanced 25 years ago. Some of them even had to be my ideas, but the point is they've all gone really far in the meantime. As you can see at the bottom of this slide, all of these things have now moved far enough along that at least some of the more courageous, or some people would say crazy, angel investors are willing to actually put money into this in the private sector, not just in academia or in non-profits. So that's pretty good. Furthermore, in academia, this is a way of thinking about doing something about aging that has become completely mainstream. As I say, I put this forward a long time ago, and for many years I had to, withstand quite a lot of opposition, and indeed some of it quite acrimonious. But in 2013, that all came to a rather juddering halt with the publication of basically a restatement of what I had said a decade earlier, that was, whose time had come, shall we say. Plus they had better graphics than I had. And so this paper, The Hallmarks of Aging, has very rapidly became by far the most highly cited paper in the entire biology of aging this century, and I'm sure it will stay that way. And it wasn't a particularly good restatement, to be honest. There were some problems with it, but it did the job. So one thing I want to highlight here very briefly is we don't really need any better theory of aging. We know a lot about aging at this point, and the main thing we know is it's fairly chaotic. There's a whole bunch of processes of damage creation that happen, and they are somewhat cross-linked. They talk to each other, and that's a large part of why, as various people have said today, there are correlations between the rate of aging of this organ and that organ, or this system and that system. But the fact is they are somewhat independent, and therefore we are going to have to just bloody get over it and do a lot of different things at the same time to the same people, and if you want to keep them healthy. 5 minutes? Yeah, good. So we don't need to understand aging any better than we already do. We need to explore aging more. We will find more details, more examples within each category, things like that. But that's really all. Yeah, that'll do great. If you can leave it there, that'll be fine. Key thing I want to explain in the last 4.5 minutes is why I, at my foundation, LEV Foundation, why I am focused on mice. Hands up anyone here who actually cares about mice. Good, not very many. That's the correct answer. I don't care about mice either, except as a means to an end. I do care about mice because I know that they have one characteristic that makes them matter. Namely, they have legs and fur. They kind of feel a bit more similar to humans than fruit flies. And that's quite important because we're already really good at extending the lifespan of fruit flies. We're especially good at extending the lifespan of nematode worms. But nobody gives a fuck about them. They do care however, about things they can identify with if and only if we are actually making progress. And this is a big, bad, dirty secret that most gerontologists sweep under the carpet as hard as they can. At the moment, if you take a middle-aged mouse and you do everything we can do today that we know that we've tried today to extend its life, healthy life, total life doesn't matter because it's about the same, then the amount that you can get is 4 months. The numbers here, these mice will typically live 2.5 years. If you start these interventions at 1.5 years, you can get 4 months. You can get them out to an average of 2 years and 10 months rather than 2 years and 6 months. Fine. Okay, here's the problem. We could already do that half a century ago. 50 years ago, we could already do that. We've made no progress. Scientists do not like to admit that they have failed to make progress because that is not exactly a good way to get the government to give them any more money. So they don't say it, but the fact is it's true. And it's a huge problem because it means that you can't go out as an expert and say that you have any confidence that we're going to be able to make any progress in the future, or indeed, let alone any progress on human aging. But I think that we can, and indeed that we can do it rather soon. And here's why I think that. Everyone knows what the difference between, known unknowns and unknown unknowns. Rumsfeld fixed that problem, right? But I want to talk about unknown knowns. People don't talk about those. An unknown known is something where you've got the tools, you've got the stuff, you've got things you know how to do, but you haven't used them properly. You haven't explored their potential properly. And that's what I want to do. And I started this 3 years ago. I took 4 things that already were known to extend mouse lifespans starting in middle age. They extended mouse lifespan a little bit. And I wanted to see whether in combination they would extend lifespan more. I reasoned that because we are fixing damage, this is a divide and conquer strategy, then it ought to work. And it basically did. This is what we got. We got a thick red line is what we got when we threw all these things in. Thick blue line is when we had none of them, the control group. The other things are in the middle, which means that we got additivity. Males were a bit more complicated. We measured a lot of health things just to make sure that health tracked lifespan, which of course it did. But the fact is, it didn't work enough. Let's go back for a second to this slide. The total amount of life extension we got was about the same this 4 months that we were already able to achieve before this. So that wasn't enough. So we want to do more. Our next experiment is going to involve putting 8 things together in the same organism rather than only 4. And this font has messed up a bit, but that's okay. At least I'm not playing a video. Sorry. I don't want to be mean to the AV people. Peter Diamandis, who's been mentioned a few times today, he has a famous phrase. He says, AI is easy, AV is the hard thing. He's a brilliant man, great friend of mine. Anyway, so the point is we need to do more, but we have a very great degree of optimism at this point that we can. And here's why. The things I'm showing you on this slide, let me see if I have this. I do. For those of you who are familiar with the database PubMed, the database of published information on biology and medicinal research, if you look at these numbers, you will recognize that almost all of them are recent, like they're in the past couple of years. That is what we are seeing now, a huge avalanche of identification of new ways, diverse ways to increase mouse lifespan, even when starting in middle age. Now, that's huge because it means that, because we didn't have that 3 years ago. If I'd wanted to do an 8 intervention study 3 years ago, I could not have done so. I did not have enough prior data from other people, but now we do. These studies are expensive, but not by the clinical trial standards. This study will cost $6 million. I'm trying my very best to raise it, and I know there are a lot of philanthropists in this room, so I will be putting up oh yes, I'll put this up first. Yeah, there's a group trying to to get me some money through the crypto world, and that's going okay. But key thing is, you know, these experiments are pretty expensive by the standards of mouse work. And, you know, any philanthropists in the audience, you know, please think about doing this, because the fact is, what we can already do is not enough. We want to go further. Everybody wants to stay healthy for as long as they can, and not just to stay healthy as long as the top 10% of people already do. That's not good enough. We must aim higher. Thank you.